Good morning and welcome to our LTAC meeting. If you have lunch money, I think Cindy's collecting it. And also remember, if you speak, to please turn on your mic. Make sure the little red button is on or you will not be heard. I think our first item of business is the approval of the minutes from October the 8th, 2012. It's been a while. Are there any corrections or additions to those minutes? If not, does any? Do I hear a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Thank you, Stephen. Second? Okay, thank you. The next item is that we have staff reports on several things, and I'm going to turn it over to Judith Sebesta, who will be doing that for us.
Thank you, Paula. Well, I'd like to say good morning, and on behalf of the coordinating board, I'd like to say welcome to everybody here. We are so pleased to have you here to talk about these important issues related to distance education, but more specifically learning technology for us. I do want to thank Cindy Valdez while she is in the room for everything she's done to help with the arrangements for today. So thank you, Cindy. We really appreciate it. And welcome to our guests who are here as well out there, I think 5 of you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. I want to just start out by giving what actually is kind of surprising to me and to Van Davis, and I think Andrew Lofters, is a fairly short report on legislative issues related to learning technology and distance education. We really expected more things to come down the pipeline in relation to this subject matter during the legislative session this year. Certainly, I think we now have the opportunity to look ahead and perhaps get out ahead of some potential legislation in the next biennium. But for now, there's really just, I would say, 2, almost kind of 3 things that I wanted to very briefly apprise everyone on in relation to distance education and the legislative session. I think for the first one, I want to turn it over actually to my colleague, Andrew Lofters, because he has been very engaged in a bill related to dual credit. So, Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
During the legislative session, House Bill 5 passed that had some overarching rule changes as far as education in general in the state of Texas. There was a correction that was submitted called HCR 224 right at the end of the legislative session before the bill actually went for signature with the governor. And it basically dealt with dual credit issues in the state of Texas and distance education and how that related to institutions of higher education, specifically junior colleges. And basically, it states that a student may take a limited number of dual credit courses, limited to 3, from a junior college in which the student's high school is not part of the junior college's district or junior college's service area. So it limits the number of dual credit courses they can take to 3. If they're within the service area.
Per academic year.
Per academic year, thank you. Per academic year. We asked for legislative intent to make sure that we were getting the right meaning from the legislator, and they said yes, that's what it meant. So a student who is taking dual credit courses is limited to 3 if they are taking it from a junior college in which their high school is not part of their service area. That was the main one as far as dual credit issues were concerned that came through the legislature.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. The other primary thing that I want to mention that maybe a number of you are curious about is the effect of SB 215, or what is known as the Sunset Bill, on this body and on learning technology and distance education in Texas. And really the only aspect of that does relate to us is that there's going to be a change in reporting requirements for out-of-state and out-of-country programs, what is largely known as study abroad, both programs and courses. Likely what's going to happen is the process is going to become streamlined. institutions will still be required to certify they are in compliance with our policies regarding study abroad or out-of-state, out-of-country programs and courses, but it likely will be something as simple as clicking on a box saying that you certify for all of your programs and perhaps doing that annually. However, we have not exactly worked out how we are going to respond to this legislation in relation to that. So I would stay tuned, and in general, the leadership of the board is right now working on how they are responding to SB 215, the sunset bill, and definitely will figure out our policies and any changes in policies and procedures before it goes into effect by September 1st. But as of now, that's kind of in progress, and I really don't have a lot more to report on that. The other potential change, and Stacey Silverman is not here at the moment to talk about it, so it's something we might have to get back with you on, is there could be a change in the role of advisory committees that work with and report to the coordinating board. That I really don't know any more than that at this point. And I don't know if it would be proper procedure to come back to that agenda item when Dr. Silverman is here, and she could probably tell us more about that. So that's all I have in terms of a report on legislative issues. Stay tuned as we especially learn how to respond to the sunset bill. I wanted to move on to the State Authorization Reciprocity Agreement, also known as SARA in short. This is a burning topic, I think, probably for all of us here today, and I don't know a whole lot about it myself. This has largely stayed within the purview of Dr. Davis's job description. So he has been he attended meetings that happened in Indianapolis recently. I did not. So in his absence, I have asked Pamela Quinn if she would be willing, because she did attend the meetings in Indianapolis, and I asked her if perhaps she would give a brief report on where we're at right now with SARA. Thanks, Pam.
Good morning, and thank you. Yes, I was a commissioner on one of the 3 operations or organizations or task forces that decided to tackle this issue over the past couple years. And I'm passing around the final report. This isn't really the final report. These are just frequently asked questions about the final report that was presented and basically adopted in mid-April in Indianapolis. The issue regarding the state authorization for distance learning, the issue is that in order to receive federal financial aid, you need to be approved to be operating in the state in which you are enrolling your students. So if you are outside of the state of Texas, you have to get authorization from the other state to do business within their state. The hitch is that every state has different requirements, different costs, different processes, different procedures, and it really could be a nightmare if you were really trying to get full authorization. For the big schools, and I'll pick on WGU since they have an operation here in Texas, it was a very costly and expensive venture for them to be able to get approval in all 50 states. But because that is how they operate and that is where they get their students, they jumped on this early on. And Bob Mendenhall, the president of WGU, said that they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get approval in the states, pay the cost where some states have expenses to do business there. Other states are kind of easy, so they just went that route. So the big universities that are really in the business of attracting students nationally did their work up front. Since then, it's kind of been a moving target, and things are constantly shifting, and as Judith just said, it probably is not done yet. But this report in April brought together the 3 groups that had been working on the project, and as Judith said, it's called SARA, which is the State Authorization Reciprocal Agreement. And this agreement is going to work on multiple levels. First of all, it has to start, with the institution working with the state in which you reside or where you are accredited. Then in Texas, they would be working with one of the, not the regional accrediting body, but one of the compacts that works regionally, and in our case, it would be SREB. So SREB, the plan is to work with the other 4 regional compacts to do reciprocity agreements, so that if everything goes right with you and your university, or the University of the Community College with your state, and the state ends up working with SREB, which I think there's an intent for that to happen, there's still a number of questions that have to be answered. Then at that point, SREB would work with the other regional compacts, and we would start getting approval across the country based on these agreements that we sign. So the intent eventually would be that everybody would come together, and because if you are regionally accredited and also meet the Department of Education federal financial aid guidelines, they would say that we've gone through enough processes to prove that you're a real institution, that you do have the operating budget to be viable for the student and for consumer protection. And so the eventual part of all is that it cuts through all the red tape and it makes it simple. But the hitch is that you're supposed to be in compliance a year from now, and it's pretty clear that this process that will make it simple won't be in place within a year. So that's kind of the catch-22. You have to be in compliance, but the easy way to get there is going to be a longer process. So now, just very recently, it appears that they've come up with something new from the Department of Ed that says unless you have more than 50 students in a state, you may be able to just do business in that state. So unless you're truly a big operator whose intent is to be recruiting nationally, we may be okay. But my suggestion is we just keep watching this as this rolls out. The next step that follows up after this commission report, and if you're interested in who the commissioners were, on the last page of this FAQ tells you who was on this commission. Secretary Richard Riley was the chair of the final commission that looked at this and brought the other 2 groups together. And the next step on this is that David Longenecker with WICHE is really going to be in charge of pulling the SARAs together. That means the regional compacts together and get it to work. There is a call out right now where they are trying to figure out who is going to be on this next step national commission working out of WICHE to figure out all of the issues. But the last I talked to Van was he said there were still some questions that had to be asked and had to be answered before Texas would fully jump into it. And his concerns at that point for the state was who was going to pay for this at the coordinating board level when everything gets operating. I'm trying to make this simple, but it is on so many layers. If a student in Kansas has a problem with one of the institutions in this state, they're going to go one place to file their complaint against you, the institution. That it would be the coordinating board. So the coordinating board, everything eventually comes back to the home institution. If you have a problem and a complaint with a student in another state, you're going to have to resolve it. But it goes through the steps back through the coordinating board. And Van's concern is who pays for the additional support at the coordinating board, the additional work that is probably going to result in this new SARA. So his question is who pays. Now, some of the institutions were saying we would be glad to pay a percentage if you have to add an extra person. We would pay a percentage of that person or some kind of surcharge. Van was hearing this in the audience, and he came, up to me and he goes, "You think Texas schools would want to do this?" "I don't think they would." And I said, "Well, I don't know." So that's his concern is, if there's additional work on the coordinating board and Judith can't take it on, who is really going to be paying for that piece? And then the other concern is just how is it really going to work with those programs that have clinicals. He did not want us to be giving up special seats for, nurses that need to get certified if it's Excelsior College out of New York that is coming into Texas and taking up places for the internships that our own students might want to get. So that issue is probably being resolved because they're saying, well, okay, if you don't have any more than, I think it was 10 students or 15 students at a location, again, that's under the radar. But if you want to all of a sudden come into the Dallas area and find places for 75 nurses that are trying to, do their internships, he would be concerned about protecting the schools here. So those are the kinds of questions that are yet to be answered, and they're more detailed questions. I think the intent is to make this work and eventually make this easier on the institutions. But the bottom line in the meantime is that if you are doing business with students and you have a substantial number of students in another state, you need to be making sure that you are getting the authorization to do business there. So it's kind of like you got to keep working on this end as the big picture stuff is also happening on a national scale. So one of those things that has to be watched. But in the whole process, the Department of Education had representation. Belle Whelan from Saks and Sylvia Manning from North Central were on the commission, so they were watching it. So this was being watched and kind of approved along the way by all the key players. And there were, like I said, many key players that had to be considered. So I hope that this clear as mud explanation helps you get through it. But it is still very much a work in progress. But, you're supposed to be in compliance a year from now. But I think always if you can really show the intent that you are working through the process, that's going to be the most important part. You can go online to WCET, a lot of help there online on how to deal with this. I happened to email Art Coleman, who was the head of legal counsel, it was called Education Council out of Washington, where Richard Wiley is a partner, and that's the group that actually did all the legwork on that. I emailed him and asked him if he could provide me any current update. I did that about a week or so ago, and I did not hear back from him yet. So I think what I've got is about the most current information, and this is just, like I said, the most frequently asked questions that should be able, if you read it through, answer most of your questions. And if you do have any specific things you want to ask me, I'll be glad to tell you what I know as I continue to watch it. So,
Pam, is the under 50 likely to be a real rule or in effect at any point?
I think that's where they're wanting to move. And this is, again, what's frustrating. All these people that put in all this upfront work, they may be going, oh my gosh, this would have been an easy solution had it been provided up front. But the problem is that the Department of Ed has final say in some of this, but everybody else is kind of doing it on a volunteer basis. I mean, all of this is we're agreeing to work together. Colleges are agreeing to work with the states agreeing to work with SREB. So I believe that's the direction it's working, but I don't know if that's official yet or not.
So it would be the Department of Ed, though, that would have to approve that?
Yeah, the Department of Ed is really key in making sure. And again, the whole intent of all of this is consumer protection. That's why the states became the key issues on all of this, because they are there to protect their own citizens and as consumers. So the Department of Ed is saying we're not going to be giving federal financial aid to any organization that is not going to deliver to their students, what they promise. So
that under 50 would make it so easy.
It sure would.
So much easier for a lot of us that don't really do out of state.
Yeah. And military are basically exempted anyway. And so for a lot of people, it's the military that runs it up over 50.
I was just about to ask about military, so you just answered that question. I don't know, I can't think of a certain specific situation, but it also might be a limiting factor where colleges, and I can't think of a scenario where it might happen, but some colleges might limit the number of students from a particular state who may not be able to get that program in their state, and if that 50 rule does come in. But I mean, generally think it's probably a good idea, but I could see also limiting or detrimental factors to it also.
Right.
Potentially.
Right.
I'm just thinking.
Well, but right now we're not able to take a student.
I know. So generally it's beneficial, but I could just think of also limiting factors as well.
Well, just to, there are some institutions that have made a commitment to any student that started in their program that they will follow through and Colorado State said that they had a student in Arkansas that they were committed, and that it cost them $30,000 to get that student approved in the state of Arkansas. So there are some real difficult states, Arkansas, Alabama, some of the schools, states up in New York that are making it very hard to do business in their state. If this rule passed, what I don't know is, would this be a state by state, or so? I'm sorry I don't have definitive answers yet, but that's just where it is right now. And David Longenecker will have the next phase, which is really the implementation phase. This was the planning phase, get it out the door. Implementation phase is, always going to be challenging because that's where the details will come out. So.
I know that Dr. Davis has mentioned to me that he believes that this national reciprocity is very likely going to be tied to regional compliance and certification. So SREB is very likely going to be key in this, correct, Pam?
Yes, correct.
And membership in SREB. And I'm sure everyone around this, on this committee is familiar with SREB, and anyone who might be tuning in online, you'll just need to know that probably is going to be a key component to this. Even though Van is kind of is keeping purview of national reciprocity, he has kind of turned over our membership as a state in SREB to me. So if anyone is not a member or needs more information about becoming a member of SREB, please feel free to contact me, and I will walk you through those steps to become that, because we think that in the not too distant future, that is going to be key.
Okay. Well, that's my report. Thank you.
Pam, thank you for stepping in and being willing to talk to us about at least what we know is the latest regarding that. We, as I mentioned before, we as an agency have been very focused on responding to the Sunset Bill and creating policies related to that. But this, I believe, with state and national reciprocity, is going to be something that we're going to have to spend some time on, and soon, I would imagine. Before I move on to the next item of my staff report, we have Dr. Silverman here, so let me go ahead, if it's okay with you, Paula, jump over to Stacey and see if she's willing to talk about anything related to changing roles of advisory committees in the board.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Stacey Silverman, and on March 1st, I became the interim assistant commissioner for the division. I am pleased to be with you all today, and this is my first experience with this advisory committee, so welcome. Sunset, our Senate Bill 215, made some pretty significant changes to the coordinating board. I think you all agree and have heard about most of them. One of the changes related to advisory committees is that now all our advisory committees will have to report their findings directly to the board. Additionally, no board members may serve on any of our advisory committees. We will be internally taking a look at advisory committees and just exactly what the statute does to our existing advisory committees. We're going to be looking at streamlining them. We're going to be looking at ways to increase their effectiveness, and we're also going to be looking at membership, what role that each advisory committee plays, and taking a long, hard look at it. So there are no changes for right now for you all, but we are going to be looking at making emergency rules for all sorts of things come the July board meeting, and we will be making changes to our advisory committees probably more likely in October. We'll see it go to the board. I'm happy to answer any questions about it. So just know that the changes do apply to statutory advisory committees as well as to commissioner-appointed committees. Let's see. Any questions about advisory committees? All right.
Thank you, Stacey. I'd like to turn over the next staff report agenda item, distance education data, to my colleague, Dr. Lofters. Andrew?
There are two issues with distance education data that I want to bring to your attention. The first is that we now have distance education ed data updated on our website, which now provides you information about the semester credit hours and the enrollment of students on not only distance education courses, but as well as non-distance education courses on different institutions, be it both junior college and university in the state. It also provides you information about what percentage of the instruction as far as semester credit hours is concerned is allotted directly to distance ed and what is allotted to face-to-face. It also gives you information on how much is hybrid as well as fully online. So all that information is now posted on our data site for the THECB so anyone can see it. The second report started in 2012, I believe. We requested information from each institution, both 2-year and 4-year, asking about their distance education programs that are being delivered throughout the state. And we called it a distance education verification report. And I'm sure I've talked to people at your institution trying to get that data so we can compile all the information. Yes, I'm sure everyone has. We did get a majority of the information. All the people that we asked for information did provide us some type of verification of what programs they are offering to institutions across the state, and we compiled it and put it into a report by both community college or CTE and university. As we were going through the report, we found some discrepancies as far as how institutions were terming certain courses and how they were identifying them, especially when in relation to their course inventory. So we're putting them still now into the report. It's 99% completed. As soon as we get through these last few discrepancies as far as what type of program they're actually identifying as being a program that is being offered by distance education to the students, and we get all of that worked out, we're going to be posting that report to the website so that you can see all the different programs from all the different institutions in the state. If any student was looking for a certain particular kind of program, either by title or by zip code, by degree plan, by award, they can do that within this report. Along with that, we've noticed that it might be time for this report to become more of an automated type system, where an institution can update their distance education program information. Basically, on a yearly basis, they can look at it at their own time frame and put their information in, and it would be in real time. So as you needed to make deletions or you needed to make additions, we're working on compiling a system for that right now. We have to excuse our time frame of getting it completed. The legislative session did keep us a little bit busy. So we're still, right now, since the session is now over, we're not coming back to that, and we hope to have that done within a relatively short time.
I have one question. Will the ability to update programs be simultaneous with you posting it on the website, or will it be a difference in time? In other words, if there is a new program, will all colleges be able to update it soon afterwards? You know what I'm saying? In other words, will it be simultaneous, the time that you post the information and the ability to update the information?
Yes, for the program, for the system that we're thinking about, as this institutions put in their information about the new programs that they have, in our vision of how the system should work, if it matches one-to-one with your course inventory and you already have authorization for the program, it should just go right into the real-time listing of what the public would be able to see as you updated your information. So as soon as you put it in, it'll be the same time you'll be able to see it on the list. The only time that we're seeing there might be a short delay would be if there was not a one-to-one relationship between what you're saying is the new program you have and what you have listed on your course inventory. That's where we're finding some discrepancies.
Oh, okay.
Then that would be a time when that program might be going to a queue, where then staff would take time to look at it and then approve it and make sure that it goes into the correct category.
I would like to personally thank Andrew myself, because just internally having this data at our fingertips has been very helpful in terms of keeping up with the proliferation of distance ed programs in this state. And I think that, especially when it gets out there on the website, it's going to be very helpful for you as well, particularly so that you can do real-time updating, but also see what other schools are doing and have that be real-time as well. My office is right next to Andrew, so I know how many hours he's been putting into this. It's a lot, and I think it's going to be a real asset to distance education in the state. Anything else on that, Andrew?
No, that ends my report for that.
Great. Then the second to last agenda item here for the staff report is the status of the working groups that I know you had organized and worked in before I actually began here at the board in January. And I had several questions about what had happened with the work that you did and what the product of that work. So Dr. Davis wanted me to report that largely the information and data collected by those groups was folded into the cost of distance ed report. Now, there is some information that was not, and he said that this may be helpful later on for other things, but mostly things like I know there was a group on cost methodology and the complications related to that. I know one group talked about purchasing consortia, and you can see this within the cost of distance ed report that we'll be talking about after the lunch hour. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. But Van wanted me to be sure to mention to you that that work is not going to waste. It got folded into the cost of distance ed report and probably will be useful in the future as well. Then my final item for the staff report is just informational. I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that in an effort to simplify a very complicated process that hasn't always been clear, I have created a series of flow charts to aid in our distance ed approval process. And this was a charge that Van gave me when I first came, knowing that I could give a kind of outside eye to the process and then perhaps work to clarify it. And so I learned how to do flow charts, which I had never done before, and created a series. I think there are about 7 or 8 flow charts, and they're largely by level, I would say. In other words, they go everywhere from dual credit to community college classes to upper division classes to doctoral programs. And I've tried to limit the amount of information on each flow chart so that it's very clear. And these can be found and downloaded. They're PDFs, and they can be found on the distance ed portion of our website under our policies and procedures. So as you look at those, please, if you have any questions about them or suggestions as to how we can continue to clarify that process, then please don't hesitate to contact me and let me know. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Judith. The next item is discussion and approval of doctoral program in Tarleton. I'm going to ask Matt Baker, who chairs that committee, to give us a report on what's been happening and what is coming up.
Okay, great. The doctoral subcommittee consists of myself and Bhagya and Paula. And we reviewed a request from Tarleton State University to offer their EDD in Ed Leadership through face-to-face delivery in Tarrant County at their 2 Fort Worth sites, really predominantly one. Kim's back there, and she'll provide some light on this. We reviewed the proposal, had a list of questions that we wanted answered, and Tarleton came back very graciously and responded to those questions. I think this committee was sent a proposal, and I don't know if the revisions or the response or addendum went out to this group, Judith. I don't know that they saw that because we had a very short time limit to get those done. But at this point, I'm not sure what the process should be. We can open it up to committee questions, or we can ask the Tarleton group to provide some more information.
Or Matt, can you cover the key points and key questions and issues that you discussed in your subcommittee's
Yes.
deliberations?
Yes, I'd be happy to, and I have those.
That might spur some particular conversation.
Well,
too.
and I think this would be a very good exercise because as we look at these doctoral programs delivered off campus, either face-to-face off-site or at a distance, these same type of questions come up about each program, it seems like, Bhagya, through the years that I've been on this committee and participated on the committee. We asked specifically Tarleton to come back and, for the core courses in the program, identify whether those courses were going to be offered at a distance, either face-to-face or some kind of hybrid nature, because it was a little unclear to us as we looked at their proposal initially whether the specific course, whether this was really a distance program or a face-to-face program, and they satisfied my understanding of the program to be predominantly face-to-face as opposed to distance. And as we look at these program proposals, it's important to keep in mind that our function is learning technology, and that's why we try to stick to that knitting as best as we can. So we ask questions on, at the off-campus sites, what is the technology support provided to faculty in terms of IT support, in terms of training support. Tarleton came back and addressed those concerns that the committee had. We had some questions on total semester credit hours of the program being above a master's or above a bachelor's degree. And we were correct on our assumptions that it was above a master's degree. We praised Tarleton State University on the Diversity Institute and the Washington, D.C. program that their graduates go through, and asked some questions in terms of how that rolls into coursework, and those questions were clarified for us. And then we asked some questions on Clery Act on off-campus sites and how they're how they verify Clery Act at off-campus sites. Those of us at institutions with off-campus sites always struggle with this, particularly institutions in rural areas. I think in Tarrant County it's probably less of a concern. And they address those questions. So that's, in a nutshell, those were questions we asked them and the response that we received back from them. Bhagya, Paula, did I miss something?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other discussion or questions from the group? Yes.
On one of the documents we have, it looks like 2/3 of the program's distance, unless hybrid is using a different definition.
When you say distance, you're meaning at another site, but it's literally face-to-face instruction?
Hybrid is a subcategory of distance, so if 2/3 of the courses are truly hybrid rather than web enhanced or video enhanced, I guess my question is what is the definition of hybrid on the document? Is it?
Well, we had this internal discussion, and we assumed everybody was using Texas Higher Ed Courting Board definitions of hybrid, which, refresh my memory, is something between 40 and 70%, or
right.
I forget the category.
50 to 85.
50 to 85.
85%.
And quite frankly, Mark, my reaction to that was our own programs, the programs I'm involved with on a day-to-day basis, just about every course that we deliver is hybrid at some degree. Based upon flipped learning, and the resident programs are becoming hybrid more so than ever. So for me, just personally, that's less of a concern because of what's going on with the trend of distance learning and archiving video and flipped learning on campus.
Any other questions from the committee? Are they going to speak?
Yes.
Do we need any further information that Tarleton representatives might need to?
Not really. They came all this way. We might ask them to say a few words about the program because we do appreciate their presence, and it's so much easier when the universities are represented face-to-face in this meeting instead of trying to do the call-in stuff like we've done in the past.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us specifically? No? Okay.
I have one or two comments.
Okay, we have a comment.
Just one or two things, and these are compliments, really. I thought it was a very good proposal. A couple things that I wanted to point out that I thought were very good about interaction between the new program and your existing students in that same program, your face-to-face students, which I thought was really, really a good comment to make. I thought that your library services were particularly good. I see, and maybe as a question, I see one sentence here that's talking about distance learner resources that are particular to your library website, which I think is also a very good component to have. That's particular to online learners. So I thought that was, it deserves compliment. And I thought that was very, very good. To see what else. I saw a number of good things. Your student evaluation of instruction was a question that I had. It appears as though it addresses two key issues in student evaluation. I just wanted to ask you one quick question about it. The two things that I think, and we try to cover at our institution, and I see also in other what I consider to be good evaluation instruments, are that, and they could be two different instruments, is that they cover not only the quality of the course design, but also the quality of the instruction delivered by the faculty or faculties. More than one faculty involved in the program. I wanted to make sure that your evaluation did cover both of those. It wasn't completely clear, but if not, strive to do that in the future. I think that would be a really, really good thing, because sometimes we center on one and don't center on another in our evaluative comments, and both I think are critical to include in getting student feedback from. And I appreciate that because I teach an online course myself. So sometimes the news isn't always so good, but it's always useful nonetheless. And those are the only comments I had. Thanks.
Well, Paula, are we ready for the subcommittee to recommend approval?
I think we'll ask Tarleton to leave us a few minutes.
I think Mark had one more question.
Oh, Mark has a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I am still curious, though, on your hybrids. Are those more than 50% online, or did you use a different definition for hybrids? Okay.
Any other questions? If you'll give us a moment, thank you so much. Matt, would you give us the recommendations then from the committee? And
I think I've already let the cat out of the bag. Sorry about that. Our subcommittee recommends approval. It was a well-written proposal, and Tarleton has a tremendous track record, like many of our institutions around the room, in delivering high-quality programs.
any other discussion from the larger committee? Not, do I hear a motion that this be approved? Sonny and Pamela, thank you. So that's our approval process. Okay. We can either tell them to come back.
We have to vote, though.
Yeah, we have to vote. That's right. Okay. May I ask, show of hands then, who votes for approving this proposal? For? And against? It is approved. Thank you.
Should we get them back?
We should let them come back in. I'm sure the suspense is killing them. Let them know. And the committee has approved the doctoral proposal from Tarleton. And thank you all for being with us today. We appreciate it. Judith is going to lead us and tell us a little bit about the potential distance ed approval processes and rules changes.
Thank you, Paula. And I do want to say thank you to Dr. Littleton and Dr. Rynearson, by the way, for being so responsive and in a rather short span of time to the subcommittee's questions about the proposal. Thank you. Thank you. Paula, really what we working on distance ed and the board could use is a little help and advice from this body in relation to our approval process and potential future rule changes. One thing that I did in relation to creating those flow charts was to look at that Word document that we have that outlines in text as opposed to visually with the flow charts our approval process. And again, Van thought that it might be good for me with kind of an outside eye, being new coming in, to take a look at that document, and working with him as well as with Andrew, we attempted to clarify that document without obviously changing any of the policies or rules, but just to really try to clarify it. So if you haven't had a chance to go and look at the newest version that is on our Distance Ed website, please do. It should have the date of May 2013 on it. But as we were going through there were a couple of crucial issues that we would love to hear feedback and advice from this body on, and then it might end up changing, I think, our rules and our processes depending on how you feel. Both of these things are related to area notification. This is a bit of a sticky wicket, and I think also just the nature of a variety of things are kind of changing the way we define area notification. So this is largely related to our definition of area notification for distance ed purposes. Two issues that we'd like to hear from you on. The first one is whether or not we should adjust that definition to include only public institutions. Right now, the definition includes both public and independent and or private. So that what is happening, and Andrew, you can, correct me if I'm wrong or chime in here, is that whenever an institution, a public institution in the state, notifies us of a new distance ed program, a distance ed change, all of those sorts of things, then you're also right now required to notify private, independent institutions within that area as well. However, it's not reciprocal. They are not required to notify you whenever they begin a new distance ed program. So the question would be, do you feel that we should change that that definition of area notification to exclude private institutions for notification? And the other issue that I think we would love to get feedback on is the 50-mile radius that we have within area notification. Right now, public institutions are required to notify any public and private institution within a 50-mile radius. 50 miles is different, even though obviously it's the same in terms of mileage anywhere you live. However, for the purposes of distance ed, and I think the spirit of area notification, that can be quite different depending on whether you live in the Houston area, in the Metroplex, versus whether you are in a school or an area in West Texas, particularly related to things like traffic. So what some states are doing are kind of changing their definition so that it's more driving time as opposed to actual distance in terms of area notification. That's the other issue that I think Andrew and I would love to get some feedback on. So that's it.
Let's discuss, first of all, the first issue, which is the private and public. Any comments or questions about that? It does seem that it should be the same, that if we have to notify them, they should have to notify us, or neither one. Yes, Cindy?
I think I really feel that if they're not required to notify us, then it doesn't really make sense from the competition perspective. I mean, we notify public institutions because we all rely on the same group for funding purposes. So that's why it makes sense to inform publics to make sure we're not duplicating each other's efforts. But if you're not required to provide the same thing to privates, I think.
And we can't require them to, obviously.
Correct.
There's no way that we would be able to require them, so that's really not
so
an
I think
option.
the rule, I really think the rule change then should be notify publics. That's my thought, at least.
Well, and they don't sit on our regional councils either, so they're
Correct.
excluded from that process. So. Any other comments?
If I may,
sure.
you're talking about the higher education regional councils. The private institutions are able to sit on they're able to participate in the meetings and so forth. They just have to be notified by the higher education regional council chair. So they
I've just never seen one on the regional council I sit on.
And certainly, it's not that the board, and I would believe any of you, I'm sure, aren't interested in what the privates or independents are doing, or the for-profits, or, I think we all have a vested interest in higher ed in general in the state. So I just want to, publicly say that it's not that we're not interested in what they're doing, but that would probably, anyway, want to get your feedback on it.
And Paula, I'll just say that when I served as dean at Tech of University College, we were always very sensitive of including the privates because of the region that we operated in and how we were pretty much underserved geographically anyway. So, plus agreements that we had with, particularly in Abilene, with Abilene Christian and Harding Simmons and McMurray. And even in Fredericksburg, Schreiner has a presence on at that site at our request. So, our philosophy has always been, let's be the good neighbor and the good citizen, and a little bit of it's probably selfish because we want to keep everybody happy.
And I think, Matt, that if we did decide to change the rule so that we do not include privates, I think you still could, as a good citizen, obviously, that you could still if you wanted to.
My comment about the regional council, I'm thinking now, I don't believe we have any large private institutions in our exact area, which is probably why I have not seen them on regional council. How about the driving time versus mileage issue? Comments? Matt, you're the one in West Texas.
Are we going to get into 85-mile-an-hour speed limits versus 25-mile-an-hour speed limits? That's, I see both sides of the notification and the 50 miles issue. I think really for most of it's more, I would be more concerned with the reaction of Houston Community College or Dallas Community College or, metropolitan areas because, we don't have a lot of programs coming into Lubbock to compete against us.
Pam,
Justin, am I wrong?
Comment?
Yeah.
Not really. No, I really don't. And I'm still kind of stuck on the commuting issue also. And then the commuting issue is a mixed bag as well because
What time of day?
What time of day is it? Right.
Right.
So how do you even begin to try to set something up
Drive time.
in regard to drive time? Right.
I think we'd all agree notification's important and some kind of geographic. It's just only fair that one would know that another public is coming in.
I would go along with what Matt's saying too. I completely agree with that. It's really only fair for someone in a large metropolitan area like Pam's or like mine or like others who are here, San Antonio, to have that notification.
And it might even lead to cooperation. Wow, that's a good thing.
That's another agenda item entirely, right? Yeah.
I have a comment. Being in West Texas, it's more than 50 miles to almost any city from Snyder, and there's essentially one college outside of our service area within that radius, and that's Howard. What we do when we start new programs is we work through the HERC, and we notify everyone in the HERC that we're establishing a new program. And that seems to work fine, and it doesn't involve mileage or distance or anything like that, and yet we're notified. We also have the privates in Abilene that normally attend our HERC, and so they become part of that. And we have a good relationship with those, just one-to-one basis. So for us, this really isn't as much of an issue as it might be for the metropolitan areas. because we've worked through that process already.
Any other comments?
So, go ahead, Sune.
My thought really was that I think this 50-mile radius thing is probably anachronistic, right? In some sense that this was probably developed when most distance ed was done via video conferencing. So you were going to walk into somebody's house and set up a center, and they said, well, thou shalt not eat somebody else's food, so therefore 50 miles radius. When we talk about online degrees, really, I mean, if you really want to be friendly, then we really, in theory, should be notifying everybody offering that same degree in the state. Is what it comes down to, right? If you're going to talk about online, because online doesn't matter. You're not walking into anybody's house really physically, not to establish the physical presence thing again in this group that we all deal with states, but I mean, in some sense, that 50-mile radius, I mean, we were just talking about it. What started that 50-mile radius anyway? I'm guessing it started somewhere in the 90s, and the speed limit was 55 miles an hour, and somebody said, it's too much of a pain to drive an hour. So,
well, and it's not, correct me, am I getting confused, Andrew? It's not required for online programs, though, to do the area notification. Yeah. So this really does, it's more about off-campus, face-to-face.
Andrew, I wondered if perhaps it could be the notification process could be an extension of the verification report. Yeah. You tie those two together, and it's much more dynamic, and you could build rules into it, and people could look at it whenever they wanted, private, public, whatever. Is that a possibility or something that you've looked at?
I haven't thought of it prior to what you just said now. The way the rules right now are structured, if an institution is trying to start a new program outside their area or off campus, the way the rules state, it gives the other institutions in that area time to give some type of feedback as far as whether or not they have any problems. If it was an automated process and that was the only way that they would be notifying, I'm just not sure if all the institutions in that area would have an adequate prior notice. I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. I'm not sure if they're actually looking to see if you're putting in a new program.
Seems like that would be the difficult thing, right?
Right. Well, the program would be already being delivered if it is posted and reported, correct?
Right.
So they would not have time to respond before the program was
I just wonder how much the coordinating board is involved in adjudication of these issues anyway, or do they resolve themselves? Yeah. I know when President Hallmark was at West Texas A&M, he was very sensitive to our off-campus site, as he should have been, in Amarillo, and we never pushed it to the coordinating board. We just tried to work it out amongst ourselves.
I think it's rare that the board has to step in.
And I often wondered just myself whether those were really elevated to the staff level at the coordinating board. Didn't know.
And is there a grace period, if you will, whatever it might be, built into the system currently now? And what is that? In other words, once the area colleges are notified, what happens then?
There is, but Andrew, can you speak to this a little more than me being newer? I don't want to misspeak.
Right. We're both sort of new.
Actually, I think this is your year anniversary today, right?
This is my first day of the second year.
Okay, not even 6 months.
You're the senior person.
I'm still pulling the new card.
The way the rules read is that if it's a distance education program and you're offering off-campus, I'm just going to use off-campus face-to-face as an example. You must propose the program and notify the institutions within a 50-mile radius at least 60 days prior to the proposed implementation date. That gives the institutions 30 days to make any objections, in which I have another question once I get finished, especially about the privates. If there are no objections, then the process can move relatively smoothly and goes right into approval. If there are objections, the institutions, according to the rule, are supposed to come to a conciliatory agreement. They need to work it out, just as Dr. Baker said, just work it out. If it's not worked out within the 30 days after the objection period, if it does get to that point, it can be referred to the commissioner for final ruling. Once the commissioner rules, he provides them the information with a certain amount of days. If they have an issue with the ruling, they can appeal to the board.
And once it goes to the commissioner, there is really no timeline in our
I think it gives them a
policy.
certain amount of time just to respond back.
Right.
Just to respond back to them. That's what I had a question for as well. When it came to the privates, has anyone had any problems within a private institution actually making an objection to a public for a new program as far as distance ed, say for instance off-campus face-to-face? In my short tenure here, I have not seen it yet. So that's why I was
The
wondering.
privates are usually smart enough to call our board of regents, and we get it worked out internally.
Okay, so going back, would the HERC be a good method to work with that? If you're looking for a place from that approval process, it seems like was it you, Roy, that talked about the HERC, and I mean, it seems like that would be a good opportunity because both venues are invited, if that's appropriate.
As far as the HERCs are concerned, and I'm going to go back and check my records, but I thought for the HERCs, when they submit the plans to the HERCs each year, those are for lower division off-campus courses. I don't think the upper division and programs are the ones that need to come into the coordinating board for approval. But the lower division courses, 100, 200 level courses, those are the ones that are reported to the HERC. And then
Yeah,
they're
I
worked
think
out
that's
there.
correct. Yeah, so that wouldn't apply across the board. That's okay, Sherry. This is what we're here for, though, to
But I
grapple
think
with these things.
we routinely would list, Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we routinely list all programs just as good neighbors, so people will know which programs we're offering with some degree of presence off campus.
Good morning. This is Nate Hewitt from Wiley College. As a private in East Texas, we too have been involved in this, and we do believe in a good neighbor policy. The 50-mile rule we do pay attention to because there are small schools within that radius, but we've not run into any problems in producing new programs as long as we've notified, and so we have that shared commitment in that area.
You know, I guess mostly I just need to get a sense with these two issues, and Andrew as well, on kind of if there is a consensus about it. And maybe the consensus is that you feel nothing needs to change with either of these, or with the first one in terms of the private versus public, perhaps in the spirit of being a good neighbor, we just leave it as is, or we change it so it's not required, and then just any institution that does want to be a good neighbor can be. And Steve brings up the point of the complications of, so if we shift from the 50-mile radius, what is the solution then? Because it can be so relative depending on things like traffic, maybe there is no good alternate solution. So ultimately, and Paula, you as the chair, what I think would be helpful for us is just if there is a consensus one way or the other, or leave them the same, that sort of thing.
Okay, let's take kind of a straw vote here. How many of you feel like that we would leave the public-private notification the same, which means that
Can I say something before we go ahead and just take a little straw vote? To be honest with you, I'm not terribly familiar. No, let me put it this way. I'm going to say two things.
Okay.
There's a lot of good neighborliness going on, and I think that's to everyone's credit around the room and around the state. And it appears as though there's a lot of communication already going on, and it's not particularly a hindrance at this point. I'm not an expert in this. That's what I was about to say first. I'm not an expert at this. And what I would like to do before we issue a consensus from this group, perhaps, is take it back to our institution, particularly since it might affect those groups from larger metropolitan areas or those colleges who are located in larger metropolitan areas, because then we got the driving time issue. We got the other thing in the 50-mile thing. Like Sune said, we might be an antiquated rule based on old technology or whatever that might be. I'd like to go back, but I don't want to wait, obviously, until the next time this group meets to come up with a recommendation. So if I could go back and maybe, Pam, I don't know if you'd be in agreement with it too, and others from larger populated areas, go back, meet with some of their leadership who might have more experience with something like this, and I admittedly don't, and get back to you very, very quickly and do something, get a sense of the group. Now, I'm not in any opposition of taking a straw vote right now, and I think that's great. But I just wanted to take it back to my college at least and see what our college thinks.
Why don't we do both? Why don't we
Yeah.
kind of get a consensus for Judith, but also say that everybody please communicate back to Judith after you have talked to your institution and have some feel for the way the rest of the institution. Yes,
But
Nate.
give ourselves a limited period of time to do that because I don't want this issue to drag.
Right.
If I may, just
Sure.
remind everybody that through SACS does have a policy about programs and locations. And one of the things that SACS does, and we learned this just here recently, is that they will also publish your new programs so that every institution, public and private, has access to that information.
You mean
So
through a
that's sort of
substantive
already
change?
codified.
I'm sorry, you mean through a substantive change process?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Yes. In effect, yes.
So, how many of you feel like that it might be a good idea to change the rules so that notification of private is not required by public? How many of you think the rules should change? Good eye. Couple. And how many of you think it should not change? So we feel strongly both ways. But and let's say within the next 2 weeks, today's the 1st, by the 15th, if you have any further comments for Judith and the coordinating board, please send them to her. And how about the issue of driving time versus mileage? How many of you think mileage is appropriate, leave it as it is? Mileage, that's the way it reads now. And how many feel that it might be better defined as driving time? Okay, Judith, you've got your...
And I just don't do that.
Thank you, but I do appreciate, Steve, I think it is a sound idea to just let everyone go back to their institutions, get a little more feedback, and get back to us. So thank you.
Yeah, but please do so within the next 2 weeks.
Right.
I will
great.
make a point of doing that.
Okay,
By July 15th.
great. And we'll keep everyone posted.
Okay. Is lunch here? All right, we're down in our agenda to lunch, and I'm not sure it's here yet. So we may...
I'm going to check.
Okay, Judith's going to check for us. We have. We're efficient now.
If it's not here, do you want to
Yeah.
start on the next agenda?
I think so.
I think
yeah.
so too.
Let's go ahead.
Paula, can I ask a question, though, on the public versus private? And you may have, has there been a lot of private universities really upset about, or, I mean, has anyone had any experience with the private institutions?
We've never had any, controversy, but we don't have any large private schools really close to us. Nate?
We've not really experienced any controversy either. Most of the small schools like Wiley, we focus on lower level core and gen ed type courses that we're building into programs. And then when we make the notification, there's not been any complaints.
Right.
Probably the only issue that we're really dealing with comes back to crossing state lines, because we do have a campus over in Louisiana, and so we have to make sure that we meet their compliances as well as we do here in Texas, and that becomes interesting as far as reporting.
Okay.
Cindy said lunch will be here.
Shall we go ahead with our agenda then? The discussion of the recommendations and the cost of distance ed report. Is staff going to present this to us?
One moment, everybody. Let me pull it up, and you should have a copy of the Cost of Distance Ed report. And for those of you who are guests or well, those of you who are guests, we actually did not provide a copy of it because it is long, so we didn't really want to destroy that many trees. But you can, and those who are tuning in online, you can look on our website, and you should be able to find a copy of this report. Let me pull it up, and hopefully our members of the committee have copies. This is an extensive report that Dr. Davis created in January of this year, 2013, really in response to a variety of different bodies and stakeholders in distance ed in Texas, but it's certainly something that is happening, I think, nationally, is an attempt to quantify and codify what these things are costing us, particularly because a number of legislatures across the country are, right or wrong, identifying distance ed as a way to save costs in higher ed. And that's not always accurate, but certainly in the long run sometimes can be a cost-saving measure. So Van was charged with creating this extensive report, and as I had mentioned before, did fold in work that you, as a body, did in your working groups to help create it. The primary part that we were hoping that this body could focus on some today and give some feedback and responses on, particularly in how we're going to move forward given the information in this report, is kind of provided in the executive summary that is on page 5, or it's actually written page 2 of the document. It's like page 5 when I've opened it up in my PDF. And if you got the copy that I send you as opposed to downloading it online, I did highlight this section. And I think that what Van and Andrew and myself would just really like would be able to just get your thoughts and opinions on any of these items and where we might move next. Really just on a very basic level, is it even possible to come up with things like a methodology for costing distance ed, and a methodology that could be utilized across any public institution? Is it realistic to suggest that perhaps that universities would work together for in consortia to create contracts for things like Blackboard support so that we're getting a reduced rate across the state? These are just two of the things that are right here at the beginning here. But yeah, it's really just
one of the things I think. As we all filled out the 4 programs and costed them out for the coordinating board last year, we were very uncomfortable having someone look at 5 proposals for an online program that might appear to be costed everywhere from $1 to $1 million, because all of us cost things so differently. And one example is Blackboard. That's not just for online learning at our institution. Every single course uses it. So it's not fair really to say that Blackboard is an expense that is totally tied to distance ed. But I think our costing mechanisms, the way our own internal finance people do things, I know I've read a lot of articles on how to see how much your programs cost, and they vary so much. And it's just almost impossible. But I think the reason for this came out of the fact that we were uncomfortable having someone compare our programs and look at them and considering the cost when they were costed so differently, and even the terminology is so different. So that's how that
I think
came
that
about.
This one issue, I think, is so crucial in terms of attempting to get out ahead of any legislation that might come down the pipeline in the next biennium in relation to legislators wanting to know, is this a more cost-effective way to deliver higher education in Texas? And I think it will be helpful if we can, if not provide a definitive answer, but be able to advise them on that.
I also think the programs vary so greatly, even within an institution, that it's very difficult to know really what costs could be attributed directly to the program. Ours are so integrated. Faculty teach both ways. There's no way to really cost. And most of our staff works both ways, so it's very difficult. Yes, Matt?
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about for a number of years on the different committees that I've been on in terms of cost is really the necessity to get the right people in the room to lead the conversation, including the CFOs of the institution, the IR folks who would be responsible for making all the internal changes necessary and agreeing to those internal changes for reporting purposes, because IR is a complicated beast in and of itself, and I just sometimes think we want to have this conversation with the wrong people at the table. And we need to be represented, but really there's a kind of a whole cross-section at the institution level that needs to be represented. And then you have the program layer, which is a different set of cats as well that, attribute faculty time and those kind of things. So, to move it forward, I'd recommend some kind of task force of, a couple of CFOs, a couple of IR folks, a couple of our group to sit down and have some earnest conversations about how do you do this. I think everybody would agree it's a good thing to do, it's an important thing to do, but there has to be buy-in to any proposal that would be recommended, or we're just wasting a lot of energy in the process. And to get the buy-in, you need I think the right CFOs at the table that have the credibility statewide that they can go back to their CFOs and say, it's not perfect, but we're going to use these metrics because it's the right thing to do.
I know when I was working on that report and went to the finance people, and they'd say, well, we don't break it out, or we don't report it this way, we don't separate. And so we were down to taking a percentage guess, which made me very uncomfortable.
Well, let's take educated guess then, but I'll agree upon a percent for IT that you're going to assess the institution, because many of our institutions are very similar. I mean, there's probably more similarities than there are differences within categories of institutions. So I think a group of smart people could really come together and say, it's not perfect, but for a blunt instrument, we're going to use a percentage of the IT cost that's attributed to distance ed. We're going to use a percentage of student services at the institution. The centralized things that we have to make distance ed work. That's the powerful and fundamental issues that we need to come to grips with.
Matt, I think you also made a good point. I'm not sure if I'm agreeing with you on this point, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. And I might be agreeing with you. You said for varying types of institutions. I think percentages of those kinds of things might vary based on the type of institution that you are or that you represent. I think that the technology, and I'm not saying more expensive or less expensive, but technology costs at a community college might vary significantly by the fact that it's a community college. Cost of its institutional research activities, cost of its student services, it appears to me to be more evident of one that would be more expensive perhaps. I don't know, but I'm just guessing at a community college. So to make one across, I'm not trying to do the work of this task force that you're recommending, but I think it obviously needs to look at the varying types of institutions that it represents. And I think that's probably what you're saying. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I guess I am agreeing with you, because there's a significant difference in percentage that it might be for technology or for student services or some of those other things that we all do, but nonetheless would be different amongst different types of institutions.
Right, and within community colleges, if we go from Roy's institution to your institution, there's a great deal of difference in terms of two-year programs.
And then Nate would have a whole different picture on this coming from a private.
Right.
But still being representative of this group also. So that might affect it as well.
But I think what I'm kind of hearing from Judith is in future legislative sessions, we might be asked to cost our programs, and they would be looking across universities and colleges. We might be much more comfortable if some type of framework for reporting these, so that we're looking at apples to apples. we would be much more comfortable providing that information if we thought there was some structure to it. Yes.
When we were working on the report, I know a lot of people thought it could generate some beneficial data, and a lot of folks are very scared of the data that would come out of it, because we were asked to cost out programs that our folks said will never go online and cannot go online, yet we were told come up with numbers anyway. So we have numbers in there. How are you going to put a nursing program online? They said we're never going to do it, but if we're going to do it, I don't know, $1 million, $2 million, something, maybe that will help. And so a lot of the data is make-believe data for those programs. Now, and as Matt said, if we can get everybody together and start talking about these things, well, even the CFOs, we have a lot of CFOs that don't know what distance learning programs are. They have various colleges, divisions, whatever they may have, and those people get funded. But as far as, do you teach 1, 2 online courses? Do you teach blended? Oh, if it's blended, now we have classroom costs as well as bandwidth costs. Oh, well, if you're a hosted institution, now your bandwidth goes to Blackboard, Canvas, or whoever, but you've got face-to-face folks using that as well. It's so mixed that I'm not sure how easily we can actually parse out some of that funding.
Well, and another thing I ran into was trying to cost a program that had been in existence for over 5 years. Institutional memory was not, I wasn't involved in starting the program, and no one seemed to remember we had turnover, so that's difficult to go back and cost an existing program also. You may know the day-to-day cost, but the startup costs are almost impossible to recreate.
I think this is a challenging question or issue, just because if you were starting up an online institution from scratch and you didn't have any legacy issues, I really do think there are things you could do to create a new system that might be cheaper than building buildings. But most of us just ramped up everything we were doing in the classroom on campus online. So we've never changed the size of the classes. We've never really changed, the instructors' pay teaching all of this. And so to me, the big places where we could have made changes, we haven't. And a lot of that is because SACS won't allow it. If we tried to do some of the models that you'll find in North Central, I don't know that SACS goes along with that. None of the fully online institutions are based in SACS. They're mostly in North Central or Middle States or somewhere else. So I think you could almost look at those and see doing something different. But most of us have just been, they called it bolt-on technology a long time ago, said if you're really going to make a change in overall costs, and Carol Twigg says this in all of her research for NCAT, which is the National Center for Academic Transformation, you have to really substantially change how you're doing business to affect the cost. And I know in our district we have not done that. And from what I know of most institutions, they haven't really substantially changed the instructional piece, which is probably where you'd find some big differences. Then you can get into, like what Mark was saying, maybe you look at what it costs to host a class online versus what it hosts to offer a class on campus. And facilities might be big differences, but the instructional piece, I don't see that much difference.
Well, and Stephen mentioned student support, which so much of what I do is not the way Banner was set up. We have, flexible parts of term. Well, the issues that make our work expensive many times is because we're the exception. If we ran on the 15-week semesters only, they have that down pat, but then you come along and try to do something a little bit different. And the same thing with our student services. Ours are an accommodation or an add-on to face-to-face student services. And again, like Pam said, if it was done from the very beginning, if you created these services and created these systems solely for an online institution, they would be very, very different.
Well, I'm very familiar with Rio Salado College, which is one of the Maricopa schools. And I mean, they set up from the beginning, they were going to have very few full-time faculty, mostly adjuncts. You'd have a master teacher with master courses. And I mean, the majority of everything they teach is with an adjunct. Well, you can really start seeing some, cost reductions in that approach. But you can't even do that in SAC. So, I would think it might be worth a look at this, and like Matt said, maybe getting people from different areas of the institutions. But I know in our own districts, we've even tried college by college to say, how much are you spending on technology? And until we force people to say, put these expenses in this budget line, it just was really complicated until we absolutely forced our own colleges to be consistent in how they recorded their data. We couldn't even tell what was going on. So you get into this college by college or university by university that isn't even connected. I think it's going to be a challenge. And I'm not trying to make up excuses, because I really wish we could find a way to be more cost effective. But we've been inhibited by some of the existing rules that we play the same game we've always played, just play it in a different way.
And inhibited by our own histories, like you said.
Oh, yeah.
Of how our programs developed. Right. Also, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth bullet item down on page 2 addresses some of those issues, Pam, that you talked about. And it says, in an effort to improve student success, institutions which are not able to effectively offer face-to-face degree programs, or even, and I'm kind of reading into that and also saying courses, should not be allowed to deliver those programs via online learning. Well, that's how a lot of ours even got started, but it seems to fly in the face of the new model also of creating new programs, and kind of goes back to your Rio Salado example as well. I think one of the primary things that we can draw out of this discussion, and I'm not trying to bring it to a close, I'm just saying I think the idea of I really do endorse the idea of some sort of a task force that needs to be, though, carefully drawn together with the right kind of membership to represent a lot of the issues that a number of us have been talking about so far. And I think that is one conclusion or one recommendation you can get out of the LTAC today. I'm kind of throwing that forward at this point.
Nate?
I really love this conversation because this was the topic of my dissertation.
Put him on the task force.
That's one I will volunteer for. But I really appreciate what you said. One of the issues, and I guess because we ran 3 pilots at Wiley, the thing that we found was there was no real additional cost on our infrastructure. Where the cost came in was on student and faculty dissatisfaction. We grew our program. We started off with 60 students, then we started changing the criteria. But everything that happened was based upon the planning model that we had. We used a traditional planning model where you have experts to make the decisions. We brought in a third-party organization, Cengage, to host the back end, to provide us that back end support for the online program, and to help take off some of the pressure off the infrastructure, but to have these things in place. And even using that third-party provider, we built in the cost into the cost of the tuition for the students. We didn't save a whole lot of money, but we didn't add a whole lot either. Our problem, however, when we started surveying each one of the pilots that we did, came up in two different formats. One from the faculty, because there was no true faculty buy-in, and that's something that we have to look at. And then the other was from students because of technical services. And in our case, technical services wasn't just the fact they couldn't log in, but it was accessing the business office, getting in touch with financial aid, those type of things. So what we at Wiley are looking at is how do you take this ship that's headed towards the iceberg and redirect it through the changing changing your planning model. In this case, we're looking at planning through consensus, because that's been the biggest issue. And if you want to know where your cost is going to be, that's where your cost is going to be. The word of mouth is the worst publicity in many cases. So if you have 400 students taking different classes, and those 400 students aren't satisfied and they start spreading the word, you're going to lose money. And so we have to build that into our model, as well as looking at the budget. Now, we've moved everything. We're a Genzabar school. We've moved everything into the Genzabar platform, and we found that we did not spend any additional funds in doing so. Now, yes, bandwidth is going to be an issue. Processing is going to be an issue, and some infrastructure changes are going to have to be made after this year. But the concern that we're still dealing with focuses around that planning and the evaluation, because there is a direct impact on your revenue from that perspective.
Yes.
One thing, I think it's good to have a task force, but one thing, when I brought the information back to try to sit down at our institution, we got all the players together, but not having the charge or knowing what we were trying to answer really clouded the discussion, in that, if you're just saying, well, we're going to provide data for a possible question in the future, and we don't know what that question or model may look like, you could just sit and talk all day. I think we have to probably come up with a starting point of what we're trying to achieve, and then we can charge the task force with doing that.
Yeah, the same thought occurred to me. I agree with you there too, is what exactly is the problem? Define the problem. We know there are problems, but they're kind of widespread. They're almost as widespread as all the different institutions represented here and how they account for the cost of their distance ed programs. So yes, a clear definition of what the group is trying to accomplish is key. Narrowing it down from, we're just trying to figure out what the cost of distance education is. What's the benefit? Specifically benefit. I know we've talked about it, and we've talked about a couple issues, and I don't want to go through them again, but that's what we need to center on first. Then we can bring the right people together to do that examination, if you will, and then make some recommendations based after that. And I don't want to make this too laborious or too time-consuming, but at the same time, I think Daniel's got a very good point.
Any other comments?
Yes. One of the things that we're doing right now at Sam Houston, along with 6 of the Texas State University system schools, 6 of the 8 schools use Blackboard, 2 of them do not. So everything we do with technology has a lot of complexities. That makes this project complex. But we spend X amount of dollars as a system with Blackboard. It's a significant amount of money. So right now we're conducting a study with Blackboard to see if they will upgrade all of us to the same version of Blackboard and give us the same set of services. And we're trying to see if we can get that for a reduced cost. So we know what that cost is today. We're trying to get all of us on a common platform and see if we can reduce the cost. So that's something concrete that we can do. I don't know if we're going to be successful. I hope we will, but we'll see.
I'm sorry to be doing so much of the talking. I apologize for that. That is bullet item number 2 on the recommendations, and I think that's really, really good. And I remember from the working groups about a year or so ago, maybe even longer, that was one of the key issues. And I think that's a clear implication from the results of this report, is to do exactly what you're saying. Now, that may be uncomfortable for a lot of institutions that may not be on a commonly decided LMS, but, change is always messy, I guess, and change is always difficult.
And I think licensing in any way, software, not even besides the LMS, there's so many common softwares that we use.
Right.
That there are many other opportunities. And, well, we're talking proctoring services right now within our system, and so there are many things that would be a common decision, if it could be made, would be good. Yes.
That was one of the points I was going to make. Our committee was the group that looked at the economies of scale. Yeah. And quite honestly, that is something that can be, it's a task or an undertaking that we could do, or I think we could do. At least those of us that were on the committee were pretty passionate about it. I think it would be really helpful to have the coordinating board strongly encourage, strongly recommend, however you want to do that, because it's the software packages, it's the LMS, whether you can do that or not, but all those other things within the A&M system, they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're trying to do this step by step, and it's not moving as fast as I would like, but certainly having the coordinating board and others recommend or encourage. We have a new CIO to really look at that would be huge and helpful. So, but it's something that can be done. So maybe we can't do answer the question and set up the task force right now, but this is a bullet item we could show some success with, or
right.
should be able to show some success. And then there were a couple others under the conclusion that there were all public institutions of higher education should be encouraged to explore the development of distributed delivery system that would allow students at participating institutions to enroll in online courses within the consortia, very similar to Virtual College of Texas. So those kinds of things, I think, can be done. So yes, let's do it. So.
It seems like in all of our discussions, what particularly would probably be helpful for the coordinating board as we get out ahead of the next legislative session is, can we reduce costs in distance education while still maintaining quality? So it does seem that all of these discussions need to be had in conjunction with quality. And I'm going to go ahead and say the four-letter word now, MOOCs. Because it's a big controversy. Can you scale up to that level? And that's how a number of people, and I would have to say who might not be in the trenches and engaged in distance ed, that's how they see that you're going to save costs, is that you're going to educate a lot of students with a single professor, a single program. But the big question then, and the big controversy has become, obviously, can you still maintain the quality of instruction? Are we talking about dictating using quality matters across the state? Are we, so I would love to see discussions of how are we maintaining quality if we are reducing the costs. We may not even be reducing the costs, but if we are, can we maintain quality too?
Always a primary issue. Yes. I think lunch is here.
In our work group, one of the items we brought up addressed quality, and quite frankly, a very, very, very tiny percent of faculty at universities and colleges have any training whatsoever in pedagogy or teaching, which you've seen a lot of articles lately that raise the question, what is our current quality? And then, as Pam said, out in Arizona, they spun off another unit, Riz Salato, to do the online piece. If you read Clayton Christensen's work, he talks about IBM surviving the mainframe, mini, and microcomputer wars by spinning off another unit. And he says innovation from within is just about impossible. And so what we have now, we have faculty who have taught in the traditional classrooms forever, now evaluating and or teaching the online courses or blended courses without any additional training. So to me, that's certainly a quality issue. We've got publishers, when you talk about adaptive learning and adaptive technology, for pretty much all of us, that's out of our reach. We just don't have the programmers or staff to develop that type of software. So we have to depend on McGraw-Hill or Pearson, somebody to jump in and put in all these resources to do it. So that has to go in the cost. We have, on the quality question, I've seen courses where face-to-face faculty have gone online, and when they say, all right, here's what I do in the classroom, I do this, I do that, oh, I can't do that, what's left? Okay, read chapter 1, here's a PowerPoint, do what you want with it, and here's a bubble test. Now, as far as cost goes, if that's all the course is, you can put 6,000 students in that course without any additional load on the instructor or anyone else. But if you're truly talking about learning, that's a whole different question, and what resources go into that.
That's true.
Thus the MOOC debate.
Yep.
So, yeah. And the MOOC, there could be good, there could be bad, but, what is your ultimate purpose?
Well, I don't think we can even define the word completely as yet. There's so many varieties. Our lunch is here, so we do need to break. So let's go have lunch, and we will resume 11:30. No, it's not.
Quarter to 12 now.
Quarter to 12.
Bring the group back together.
Usually do 30 minutes, don't we?
30 minutes, 45, I don't care. 12.
12.
30,
12:30. Okay, we'll resume at 12:30.
What's the time?
Reconvene our meeting, and we're actually on our. We could continue our discussion on the cost report if there is further discussion.
Where do we start?
Well, we kind of ended, I guess, or wrapped up right before lunch, but there are some other points in that report that we might want to address.
Do we want to agree as a group or not agree as a group to recommend a task force that would, as Daniel recommended initially, clearly define what the charge that is and what the clearly defined importance of defining costs of distance education programs and refine itself to that charge, number one, but then number two, also have a good representation, as Matt recommended, of different either administrators or folks who are in the know, if you will, to start working on parameters, because there's so many variables, there's so many different parameters as to trying to figure out what something costs based on so many different things that a lot of people around the room mentioned. But I think a task force would probably be one of the best. I'm thinking a task force might want to be one of the better recommendations that this group could make. So I'd like to maybe put that out in terms of just at least addressing the first bullet item here on page 2, and that's primarily what we talked about before lunch. So I don't know. I mean, do we want to see how far that conversation will take us?
That would be very helpful, I think. And I think additionally, if we could, and Steve, you alluded to this some, is maybe if we could just take a few moments to talk about what we do think the appropriate makeup of that body would be, members of this group as well as representatives outside of the group at institutions, be they CFOs or chief instructional officers or what have you, and also maybe a timeline. Do we envision this task force? Well, maybe that's a tough thing to say when we don't really know what the charge is yet. But certainly could maybe aim at something like the next LTAC meeting, there would be a report from this task force.
I think Matt mentioned the financial piece, institutional reporting, and then, of course, there is the program piece, too. Those three groups are all groups that have a stake in this.
And perhaps you mentioned also, just before we got here, just before we reconvene, you mentioned executive leadership, also
right.
Senior administration.
Right. And yeah, my knee-jerk on it would be, let's focus first on centralized support as opposed to getting at the program level. But, if we could look at what is the true cost of distance delivery for Blackboard support as opposed to resident instruction or hybrid, whatever. What is the true cost for student financial aid? What is the true cost for student services that are provided, for initial advisement, those type of things, for career placement, and those broader scale kind of centralized support systems that we must have before we can even get to the program level, because programs cannot afford to do these kind of things on their own. And of course, IT's in there. I mean, it's huge.
Any other suggestions as to the makeup of this committee or the task force? Yes.
This might be an opportunity to bring in somebody from Western Governors University, since they truly have a whole different model and a whole different perspective on how things are funded, as opposed to us that, most all of us have been in the face-to-face world for so many years that it's so intermingled, it's hard to separate. So,
Any other suggestions?
By the way, Mark, I'm glad you brought that up. We recently added Western Governors University, Texas, as one of our Grad Texas institutions. If you know this website, which is largely a grant-funded project to increase the number of degrees completed by stop-outs, if you will, near completers, 75 hours of credit, that sort of thing. And it's kind of a centralized location at which they can get information about adult degree completion programs, or just degree completion programs. And we recently added WGU Texas to that. So we've been working with them. We have a connection with them in relation to that we might be able to capitalize on. But it makes sense.
What about the timeline issue? Is this something that should be immediate and get started immediately?
There is a sense of urgency, obviously, from what we talked about before we went to lunch in terms of getting out in front of this issue.
But there's also the sense that we don't know the starting with the end in mind kind of thing that we were talking about, finding the what we hope to accomplish.
Right.
Maybe a balance between the two.
Well, I think it's probably useful to have a group which really just looks to defining what we're after. Is that, are we building a model first? I mean, maybe we need to have a subcommittee of some sort that looks at this costing model to have clear. It's like when you're trying to teach, you want clearly defined learning outcomes. So we want very clearly defined outcomes before we maybe send it off to the chief academic officers and institutions and ask for CFOs and academics to participate in this whole thing.
Sune, I was just going to suggest that it seems like within the next month or two, if perhaps a subcommittee of this body could work with myself and Andrew to figure out the charge, and then once you know what you're going to do, then you can more appropriately figure out who the proper constituents are to engage in that charge, I think. And that could probably be done within the next month or two, I would think. Well, with
volunteers?
Semester starting, but...
I'll volunteer.
I've got one question. As far as the report that we've got, being that there weren't a lot of definitions within that report, could we use that as a starting point to where maybe this task force takes those either parameters, I mean, it's got it all broken out, and say, you know, this is where we could drill down to apples comparisons, and maybe just come up with a suggested way of using what we have, or be able to put what we have in a context. Because one of the things that I looked at is the cost disparities between, you know, what's common degrees within that listing is, you know, you've got to have some context to give that relevancy. And if we're worried about legislators looking, or lectors looking at that and saying, well, how come this college can produce this degree for $63,000 and it costs $7 million over here?
Right.
Maybe at least being able to put some context to what we already have to be able to express. Because if it goes on the website, then you've got the interpretation, you know, up to everybody. And
correct.
So maybe that could be a starting point of, and then plus give us a context to work off of that kind of model that's there already.
Okay. Any other volunteers? Patrick? Oh, question.
But to build on what Daniel said and what Mark said earlier regarding how you came up with some of the numbers and how we all did, not that this is always the best way to initiate a project, but to look at what are the barriers that we encountered when we were trying to do this before, and see what it would take then to knock those down, or how we could get around those. Because if we don't surmount those barriers, we're really not going to make much progress anyway. And some of it may just be need to have the right people at the table to have the conversation, and then we recommend that in how we compose the task force. But there may be some things that are less easy to overcome. But at least defining what they are, I think, would be a helpful first step.
Correct.
That's a great point, Patrick. That's classic strategic planning, isn't it, where you identify the obstacles to the goals?
I think one more thing, we need to be sure we have a good representation. We have everything from single campus, small enrollment schools to, you know, multi-campus universities on this board. And if we don't represent all of them, then we're not being fair to any of them.
Right. And 2- and 4-year institutions, regional and large and some very small. So I think that's a good point.
Mark volunteered to be on the subcommittee, by the way, so
Okay.
if you can put that in the record, Andrew. We're going to hold him to that.
Do we have a couple of other volunteers for this group? Okay, Michelle and Nate. Okay.
All others are building up their courage to volunteer. One of the barriers that we ran across, some institutions have non-disclosure agreements with their LMS provider and couldn't necessarily provide the numbers for the LMS for the report. So even little things like that pop up.
That's true.
Charge down first. Let's define what
Okay.
the problem kind of thing is and define what we want the group to,
Right.
what kind of composition of the group and the timeline.
Okay, we've got 4 people.
That's plenty for now.
Yeah. So shall we discuss the exact charge for this group?
Well, I thought this.
Are they
Is that
going
what
to
this?
come up?
Yeah, I thought
they're
that.
gonna
Isn't
come
that
up with
what
it.
this group
Yeah.
is going to be doing? Was
It's
that
coming
my
up with the
understanding
charge
of this?
themselves. Okay, good.
And I can for that, so that's Sune, Mark, Nate, and Michelle, right?
Okay,
Did I miss anybody? No.
We have our different groups and sizes kind of. We've got 2 and 4. We've got private and public. That's good.
Oh, I don't think that's really necessary
Well,
for the subcommittee,
I think it's
is
good
it?
to always
Or-
have a spread, though.
Okay.
You know,
To do what? I'm sorry.
that we have some different types of institutions represented, even on the group that's putting the larger group together.
Oh.
But I think we do. I think that's good.
I think so.
Okay.
Good. Okay. I'll be in touch then. How about that? I will be in
All right.
touch in the next week or two, to probably the next week after the 4th of July holiday, to talk to you all about that.
Any other discussion from the report?
I just need a minute to read.
Okay,
through them all.
go ahead. Because even as we move to our next agenda item, I think a lot of the driving force for our activities in near future may be coming from this report, really. So we can continue to look at that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I have to say about it, but we haven't discussed the 4th bullet item in any depth at all. Coordinating board working with this advisory committee and other institutional representatives should develop a definition of effective online education and a uniform standard by which it can be assessed. That is
no small task.
No, that is huge.
That is huge. That is really
huge, and so it probably ought to be
far-reaching.
something-
Yes.
I'm not even sure where the discussion would lead to, but I'm just kind of feeling the obligation to discuss it.
Right.
But not knowing where my first comment would be, to be honest with you. But
Well, we certainly,
Assessment
a place to start, if not here, but if we have this as part of the charge of our task force, is certainly the SACS document is really kind of what we use right now, the SACS guidelines for best practices. That's kind of how we are certifying programs right now, and it's a place to start. But I wish Van were here to kind of talk about maybe a history of whether or not anyone within the agency has felt it necessary to kind of create our own apart from that, or if we think that would behoove us in the state of Texas to do that. But that's kind of the document where I think any discussions would need to start, since that's really the current guide to best practices in the state.
Right.
But is it detailed enough? I'm not sure. Does it align with programs like Quality Matters that institutions are using? I'm not sure. So,
but didn't we have I think last year or before that, we did have our own best practices.
But it really comes from the SACS. It's pretty parallel with the SACS document.
okay, well then maybe we're there.
Okay.
Right. I don't think the state. Now SACS is updated, and I don't think the coordinating board list has been updated.
we need to look at that then.
I believe it still has an older date on it. So that might be good to review it and to make sure it's in line with current SACS.
Okay. One of the other things that struck me about this is, and maybe Patrick, maybe you can help me with some of this too, because you and I were on the same working group. And I remember every one of the details that we wrote in there, but I didn't see anything in here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't see anything on open source or open educational resources. Is there anything in there on that?
In that report.
And I was again, I didn't go through it with a fine-tooth comb, but at the same time, I didn't see anything on there, and I thought that would be a good discussion. So I think it's also, my point is, I think it's significant to note what's not in the report as opposed, in addition to what's in the report. Right. And I know one of the recommendations we had was to develop even though we had a start at a couple of years ago in open educational resources or a portal. I'm sorry, I couldn't think of the word, a portal, which would serve not only as an information portal, but also as a repository for materials, which is something we did get a start on a couple of years ago. And I know, Pam, Dallas put together a portal also, and there's some good stuff there too, a lot of good stuff there, in fact. But the thing I was keying on mostly was open source. And I think we looked at a lot of what the state of Washington was doing, and some other folks in California has now started an initiative, which I think is of a slightly different flavor, but to develop an initiative to try to develop acceptable open source text and other open educational resource materials that could be used across the state, or could be available, not necessarily saying you have to use this, but it could be available across the state, so that multiple people can contribute, multiple faculty can contribute to the improvement of those materials, number one, and use them in the classroom, number two, but also, number three, save students a lot of money in cost. And if the state could facilitate the development of that was one of the recommendations that we had out of our work group. And I think it was unfortunate that we didn't see it here, because I thought that would be a very, very good undertaking for the state to do.
And in all honesty, I'm aware of TextLore, but I don't really know a lot about it or why I don't think it's been very active in terms of adding to this existing online repository. Does anybody have any knowledge of where did TextLore grow out of this body, or are you familiar with it even?
I know all
TXLOR?
about it. I know all about it.
Sune.
It was actually started off with a project at the UNT actually, and then it expanded out, came back to the board, and the UT system became partners in it. And that's why we now so right now what we're doing is there's two-pronged effort to populate the Learning Object Repository with objects from the UT Health Science Centers and also the board projects, including the reading projects and all the grants that we have done before. So that work is still going on. So it's in process. Now, when it comes to uptake on how many users we have, right now the people who submit projects to us for the repository are the people who consume it, which is a very interesting thing. So what we have done and put in place right now, we're working on a marketing plan to involve the state agencies but other institutions in the state to either contribute or even use the product in there, because there's some really good products in there, especially for health sciences. There's some really fabulous stuff that MD Anderson put in there, which is really, really good. We've also had a conversation with the state of Georgia, who has a statewide learning object repository, to federate content with them. So we're still figuring out the details of how that'll work. That's where we are at right now. That's a quick 2-minute synopsis.
Okay. Thanks, Sune. I mean, I really was not aware of that, and that it was largely a collaboration between the THECB and the UT system. So I guess discussions could be had about, do they want other universities jumping on this? Is this considered the state learning repository, et cetera?
Yeah, I believe the board, of course, wanted to be the state repository. I mean, we talked to the Legislative Budget Board because they were looking at and we had had conversations in this group about open educational resources, and that's what they were looking at as an open educational resource. So that's what we are populating right now.
So it is open to other universities?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever been presented to this group in the 4, 5, 6 years I've been involved in it.
Well, I inherited the project about a few months ago. So, But what we are trying to do right now is, and this is where we'll come back to the group really, because this becomes a good starting point, is to have a governance. It doesn't have any governance right now. Governance is few of us making decisions, which is not ideal. So we're trying to we're soon going to have a conversation about setting up governance structures for this. So for the people who submit projects right now, there's an editorial process they go through, especially the medicals. There's an editorial process in which content is vetted before they say, okay, it can go in, because we want to make sure it's high quality. But that needs to be systematized. So there are some challenges we are facing right now is how to get everybody involved in looking at this. But it'll be a conversation that will happen for sure.
Thank you. Any other groups that know that their reports or things that they found in their working group are not in that final report that we might still want to address? That group?
Yeah.
Paula, I will add one point to or expand just a little bit on this list of bullet points in that executive summary, because something has shifted just a little bit because of the Sunset Bill and our authority in the board regarding what we can and can't do. And the fifth bullet point says that institutions which are not able to effectively offer face-to-face degree programs on their home campuses, as determined by student outcomes, should not be allowed to deliver those programs via online learning. However, as most of you are probably aware now, the board no longer has the authority to close programs, underperforming, low-producing programs as of September 1st. So this would not be something that we would have the authority to do. What we are doing is making recommendations. And the second part of that, that says that institutions wishing to add future online programs must show that any that are already being offered are effective before they can add additional, that we would have we still have authority over the creation of new programs. So that's just something, if that's a part of the task force charge, looking at quality in that way, they'll just need to keep in mind that we really don't have the authority to close programs anymore.
All right. But still have approval.
Of new programs, yeah. Is that a fair way of saying that, Andrew?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Are there any other, moving on to the last item on our agenda?
Could I add one question?
Certainly.
I just have a question for you. For the cost of education report, I was speaking with both of you earlier. I was wondering, how are you categorizing institutions as far as their distance education programs in order to put them in a category to make an initial determination where they are in the process so they can have an accurate way of determining what their cost would be? And here's why I'm saying that. I just was thinking when I was listening to you make the comments, is there a way that you can define where an institution is on the technological evolutionary scale as far as distance education is concerned, as well as what the size of their program is now in order to categorize them into initial groups of where you want to put them to determine their cost? Because that, to me, will determine how much money they have to put into infrastructure, how much money they have to put into training, how much money they have to put into faculty. Is that something that's already established in the, and I forgive me if I'm not going into the report too deeply, but I think that makes a difference as to where your institution is starting on the scale and how much it's going to cost to deliver programs. For instance, if an institution is already offering 300 programs compared to an institution that's offering 5, do you put them in the same category as when they're determining the cost of creating these programs and delivering them to students across the state? Just a question. I just want to have to submit.
Well, keep in mind, too, as far as programs go, one of the difficulties, at least at the community college level we have, unless you have a program defined as a degree program that is 100% online, the students drive that process, not the institution. So the students can take 1 or 2 face-to-face or 50 face-to-face in just one online course out of that program. So the institution doesn't have that much control over whether the students are in an online program or a face-to-face program. It's just a program to them. So they pick up courses wherever they can.
So I think in answer to your question, the answer is no. And I think that was a problem that became evident when we were all doing our surveys. I mean, that is a problem that bubbled to the surface. Is various institutions were at various levels of development and maturity, and if you want to even call it maturity, but various levels of where they were with the numbers of programs they offered, with their technological backgrounds, with all sorts of other kinds of things, that it was very, very hard to determine cost because different institutions were at different levels and different places and different on the, if you want to even call it, the evolutionary scale.
Differ greatly also in faculty expertise and knowledge.
And in some cases, having a whole lot of experience, like Pam, you pointed out, like having a whole lot of experience in this. A lot of us evolved from simply having face-to-face programs. We just patterned our programs after face-to-face programs, right? And I know that's the case where I am. I think that's the case where you are, and many of the rest of us. But then again, there's the Western Governors University that doesn't have any face, or may not have as many, or if I don't know if they have any at all. But they're creating some of these things new. But their cost, is obviously going to vary differently. There's just so many different variables. The bottom line is no. There is no existing structure for that sort of thing, like you were asking. Unless anybody knows of anything that I don't.
I think so.
But I don't think that exists.
And sometimes it might be a disadvantage to being pretty far down that road, as opposed to taking advantage of the innovations and partnerships that others have discovered and not having to unlearn institutional behaviors in order to capitalize on them.
Right.
So I think that makes it particularly difficult then to look at robustness in terms of putting institutions into different groups.
Or simply have to have an existing face-to-face program in order to build a distance learning program off of it.
Correct.
Which concerns me about this one bullet item recommendation.
And the proportion of distance learning to face-to-face has a lot to do with institutional support and the types of support that you have. Judith, what would you like us to do in addition to what we've already done?
Well, I mean, mostly and I know Andrew would as well, just like to hear any other issues that you feel that this body and or the coordinating board should be grappling with as we face this new brave world of technology and higher education. So I was just wondering if there were any other things that anyone wanted to raise, and if we decide we want to prioritize it for the committee for the future.
Pardon?
For what?
Yes. Yes.
Well, I have a couple of things. As we move forward, I think for Texas, an area that's we're going to hear more and more questions about is competency-based instruction.
Correct.
Western Governors already operates that way. When Belle Whelan visited our campus, we specifically asked her where SACS is with competency-based instruction. And she said, well, SACS is a little slow. It may be a while before they get around to competency-based instruction. But then we also saw the Dear Colleagues letter come out from the feds about, hey, if you want to send in a letter, now's the time to do it. So I think that needs to be on our radar. And the other thing that, as you review the rags, there's more and more and more about the way we teach, getting away from I think as Mark Milleron says it, the spray and pray technology. of traditional lecture more toward learning outcomes. Instead of lecturing, look at student learning. And we're not going to get there unless we have a lot of professional development in pedagogy, online delivery, hybrid blended delivery, because it's just not the same critter as walking in a face-to-face classroom and talking to a bunch of people. So I think that's going to be critical in the future.
I didn't actually use the word analytics, but that is what everybody's talking about. And even while I'm down here, there's a new company based here in Austin that is all looking at the analytics. But how do you start applying analytics with courses that are developed by 3,000 different instructors and all of that? So, but that's just an issue if we have to worry about outcomes-based funding, and we have to worry about completion and all of that, being able to figure out where we're losing students and why we're losing students. The analytics has got to be built in. So that's a piece that I think
we had a working group on analytics.
Yeah, there is. Okay.
Learner authentication is not going to go away. We need to keep that in the forefront, and any kind of professional development that we could build into this committee. We've brought experts in nationally to talk to us in the past, through technology typically, instead of paying their way, because I think our budget's limited. But any kind of professional development you could provide us from the coordinating board perspective would be great, or allowing us to be part of the conversation that's going on at the federal level would be very helpful.
I'm just piling on to a couple of the other comments, but I was also going to mention course quality, which I think is a critical thing. We are very strongly embracing learner-centered instructional design concepts, and they're proving to be more and more successful as time goes on. And that obviously has a strong influence on faculty training, which is again the professional development aspect of things. And I was also I'm skipping from topic to topic, and I was also going to mention identification, online identification, whether it's biometric, whether it's testing, that sort of thing. But as we all know, SACS is now requiring that the student who registers for a course is the student who, in fact, is taking the course, and all that stuff that's involved there. And currently, user ID and passwords suffice, but I think that's only a limited amount of time before that will not be sufficient, and that we're going to have to be going to and exploring other methods of how students identify themselves. Again, whether it's biometric or whatever it might be, I think those are items that this committee needs to discuss. So course quality, instructional design, learner-centered instructional design, faculty professional development, and professional development for people like us who are working in the field. But I think particularly faculty professional development, that's come up a number of times already today. And then user identification, I think, is another key issue too. Along with open source. Did I mention open source?
Right, and competency-based instruction. So
that's another one, right?
Competency-based instruction, right.
Just evidence of how many things are changing very quickly for all of us.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I would like to make a pitch. I don't know how many of you know of the faculty development modules that the board has sponsored already. They have done a bunch on reading comprehension, data analysis, and interpretation. There's a whole set on online learning. There's some on hybrid instruction. They've sponsored these over the last 5 years, and I'm not entirely sure that the word of them has got out.
Well, and Van talked to me about the need probably to kind of get the word out again and put out a call for, because these were developed by, not by board members, but by, or coordinating board members, but by others at institutions. Correct. So it might be a good time to think about revitalizing that, asking institutions if they're willing to put some resources behind them, and they're really great resources. I used them before I came to the board myself in my teaching, and they're there under our distance learning section. So I'm glad you brought those up, Sune, but they can be expanded on.
Yeah, I mean, they're all downloadable. I mean, that's the whole point. They're all downloadable. You can use them, modify them to what you want them to be. And, I mean, bear in mind that the teaching online one is probably about 2 years old now, and things have changed in 2 years. But, I mean, because you can modify them, I think it's a really useful resource.
Any other topics? Are we done? Are there any more specifics, particularly on this last point, that you'd like from us, or the board, the staff would like from us?
This has been very helpful, very, very helpful for me. I mean, just partly because I'm new. Andrew is relatively new, so although I believe he's been at one of these meetings before, but just to have your faces for your names, and then just get a sense of what your priorities are is extremely helpful as I move forward in the organization. And I have such great optimism for distance ed in this state, just as I've been working with a number of you already, and your passion and commitment to making sure that Texas stays on the vanguard of technology in higher education. It inspires me, and even more so today. So that's mostly what I wanted to say, Paula. And just one little bit of housekeeping. Cindy, she was so wonderful to arrange for our lunches today, and just in general to make arrangements for this meeting. If you get a chance, send her a thank you email. But also, if you have any feedback on the lunch, she's very eager. If in the future you just they didn't have choices that you wanted or needed, you felt it was maybe it cost too much for you, or if you felt it was a great deal for the money, just a good deal for the money, that is, please let her know. Give her some feedback on that so we can make sure that we're meeting your needs here, because you go to a lot of trouble to come to these meetings, I know, and it's a lot of time, either from your work or from potential vacation in the summer. So I appreciate it very much.
Judith, let me ask you this too. We met 4 times a year, I believe, in the past. Do we want to continue that? Does that schedule suit the board?
I would like to. I think it's going to take some pretty serious work to get ahead of these issues that you've identified and others that might come up before the next legislative session. So I certainly would, but I think that's for you all probably to say if it's feasible for you.
Well, I think it depends on how aggressive we want to be about each of these issues. We've identified about a half dozen new issues. We've certainly got the one that we're putting this task force together to try to define some of the cost issues that we want to tackle, and then that goes on from there in the development of an actual group that's actually going to study this. So yeah, it all depends on how aggressive we want to be.
Well, that would put our next meeting in October. 3 months.
That's fine.
3 months. Does that sound good? All right, and we'll let you all work on a date for us, because a lot of times getting the room is the biggest issue. Is there anything else? Pam?
Competency base came up again, and I just want to let you know I passed out this turquoise sheet about a conference that's going to be in Albuquerque, and since it's so close, you might want to consider it. But one of the keynote speakers is Paula Blanc, who is president of Southern New Hampshire University, which is in all the news right now, and I think he's going to be a really hot speaker at a lot of conferences, but I think this is probably one of the first ones he's going to be attending, and his whole thing is they were able to get federal financial aid for competency-based, and he has said it's not as hard as we might have thought it was. So he will be there not only as a keynote speaker, but he's going to be on one of the panels. And this is a conference, I'm actually chair of it, so pardon me, but it's a small group, though. It's not a huge conference, and you really get to know people and have a lot of good discussion time. And it's called the National University Technology Network. It was started in Oklahoma City at OSU outreach over 30 years ago, and it happens to be housed now at the LaCroix Center in Dallas, and I am the perpetual chair, it seems. But anyway, it's a good conference, and just wanted to bring it to your attention because somebody else mentioned something about professional development, and this is not an inconvenient one to find, so thank you.
Okay. Very good.
there anything else before we adjourn?
I had one question I asked Mark about. I've got our VCT coordinator that's retiring in August, and I knew Ron, as a member of this committee, was indicating that he was going to be leaving. Has there been any direction as far as what's going to happen to VCT in that's just floating out there?
No, actually, Van and I talked about this just the other day, and not to my knowledge, we were waiting to see what happened in terms of that retirement and if there was any talk amongst them about who was going to provide leadership for it now. So not to my knowledge. Andrew, are you aware of anything related to Virtual College of Texas? Okay. So I don't know.
Just a side comment to that, Daniel. Those will be some hard shoes to fill. Ron Thompson has done a phenomenal job, and amazing that what the things that he's done for just the community colleges, but also for the state. So I will miss him, and maybe there'll be a couple of us get together so that we can figure out some type of appropriate recognition for him, because he's so deserving. So.
That really would be nice. He leaves at the end of August, and he says he really is going. But the job description is with Austin Community College right now, and they are going to be rehiring for him. But I think a lot of it still is exactly what is that job description going to look like. He is planning before he leaves to fulfill the position that was held by his coordinator, but it'll probably be the fall before there's actually a person replacing him in that capacity. There's some other things happening with the Texas Association of Community Colleges right now, because they've started a new Center for Student Success, and they want to make sure that the Virtual College of Texas ties in with the success and completion agenda. So that's the update.
And I've got some more information off mic when we finish up for everybody.
All right. Well, if there is nothing else, then we are adjourned. Thank you so much for being here.